Okay. The heart of the matter. Every now and then I return to poor Black communities I lived in or visited during my childhood. These neighborhoods that were once vibrant, full of life, with flowers planted outside the walks of rundown shacks, folks on the porch, are now barren landscapes. Many of them look like war zones. Returning, I bear witness to desolation. Surrounded by an aura of emptiness, these places, once shrouded in hope, now stand like barren arms, lonely and empty. No one moves into their embrace to touch, to be held, and to hold, to comfort. Poverty has not created this desolation. The generations of folks who inhabited these landscapes have always been poor. What I witness are ravages of the spirit, the debris left after emotional assault and explosion. What I witness is heart wrenching loss, despair, and lovelessness so profound it alters the nature of environments both inside and out. The desolation of these places where love was and is now gone is just one among many signs of the ongoing crisis of spirit that ravages Black people and Black communities everywhere. More often than not, this crisis of spirit is talked about by political leaders and community organizers as engendered by life threatening poverty, violence, or the ravages of addiction. While it's utterly true that all these forces undermine our capacity to be well, underlying these issues is a profound spiritual crisis. As a people, we are losing heart. Our collective crisis is as much an emotional one as a material one. It cannot be healed simply by money. We know this because so many of the leaders who preach to us about the necessity of gaining material privilege, who are holders of wealth and status, are as lost as as lost as this enabled emotionally as those among us who lack material well-being. Leaders who are addicted to alcohol, shopping, violence, or gaining power and fame by any means necessary rarely offer to anyone a vision of emotional well-being that can heal and restore broken lives and broken communities. To heal our wounded communities, which are diverse and multi-layered, we must return to a love ethic, one that is exemplified by the combined forces of care, respect, knowledge, and responsibility. Throughout our history in this nation, Black leaders have spoken about the importance of love. Indeed, now and then, contemporary leaders stress the importance of a love ethic. Referring to the love ethic in his work Race Matters, philosopher Cornel West contends, a love ethic has nothing to do with the sentimental feelings or tribal connections. Self-love and the love of others are both modes toward increasing self-valuation and encouraging political resistance in one's community. While contemporary Black leaders and thinkers talk about the need to have a love ethic as a foundation of struggles for Black self-determination, in actuality, most nonfiction writing about Black experience does not address the issue of love in an extensive manner. Since our leaders and scholars agree that one measure of the crisis Black people are experiencing is lovelessness, it should be evident that we need a body of literature, both sociological and psychological work, addressing the issue of love among Black people, its relevance to political struggle, its meaning in our private lives. I began thinking about the lack of commentary on love in Black life when the debate about separate schools for Black boys was taking place. Everywhere I turned, I kept hearing that Black boys need this discipline, that they need to learn the meaning of hard work, that they need to have strong role models who would set boundaries for them and teach obedience. Again and again, a militaristic model of boot camp and basic training was presented as a solution for the behavior problems of young Black men. Not once did I hear anyone speak about Black boys needing love as a foundation that would ensure the development of a sound self-esteem, self-love, and love of others. Even though Black male leaders were among the voices defining lovelessness as a key cause of hopelessness and despair among Black youth, none of them talked about the role of love in the education of young Black boys. When huge numbers of Black males, young and old, gathered in the nation's capital for the Million Man March, there was no discussion of love. The word love was not evoked by any prominent speaker. Again and again, when we talk about the contemporary crisis of Black life, discussions of love are absent. This has not always been the case. Throughout our history in this country, radical Black political leadership has emerged from religious settings, whether they be Christian, Islamic, or less recognized spiritual paths. Within these religions, especially Christianity, love has been central. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was a prophet of love, preaching to the souls of Black folks and our non-white allies in struggles everywhere. His collection of sermons, Strength to Love, was first published in 1963. Later, in 1967, in an address to a group of anti war clergy, he stated, "When I speak of love, I'm not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I'm speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality." This Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist belief about ultimate reality is beautifully summed up in the first epistle of St. John. Let us love one another, for love is God, and everyone that loveth is both God and knoweth God. Much of King's focus on love as the fundamental principle that should guide the freedom struggle was directed toward upholding his belief in nonviolence. While he admonished Black people and again to recognize the importance of loving our enemies, of not hating white people, he did not give as much attention to the issue of self-love and communal love among Black people. One of the most talked about sermons in the collection was titled Loving Your Enemies. King used this sermon to explain and justify his urging Black people to love our enemies. While we abhor segregation, we shall love the segregationist. This is the only way to create the beloved community. Yet he also spoke directly to the white majority, stating, "To our most bitter opponents we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. We cannot in all good conscience obey your unjust laws, because non-cooperation with evil is as much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. Throw us in jail, and we shall still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our community at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead, and we shall still love you." Nothing was said in this collection about loving Blackness. King did not address the issue of how Black people would love the enemy if they did not love themselves. The emphasis on Black people loving our enemies was the aspect of King's political agenda most criticized by radicals approaching Black liberation from a more militant standpoint. Again and again, Malcolm X warned against this message of nonviolence. In his 1964 speech to Southern Black folk, he told them, "Don't you run around here trying to make friends with somebody who's depriving you of your rights. They're not your friends. No, they're your enemies. I'm not going to let somebody who hates me tell me to love him." On those rare occasions when Malcolm X spoke about love, he addressed the need for Black folks to change how we saw one another, calling attention to internalized racist thinking. Overall, though, he did not have much to say on the subject of love. Underlying his attacks and the critiques of other militant Black leaders on King's philosophy of nonviolence was the assumption that love was for the weak and faint of heart. Real men attended to more important matters. Militant Black power leaders who stood up to the mantle of Black determination. Folks like Huey Newton, Elaine Brown, Kwame Ture, then known as Stokely Carmichael, preferred discussions that centered on building healthy self-esteem rather than discussions of love. More and more, as Black radicalism was divorced from its religious roots, becoming more secular, discussions of love were silenced. Increasingly, as Black liberation was made synonymous with the creation of strong Black patriarchs, love could no longer have a central place in the movement. Real men were fighters, not lovers. Freedom, militant Black leaders told the world, was about the will to power and not the will to love. The more freedom became synonymous with gaining equal rights within the existing social structure, the less love was part of this equation. Gaining access to material privilege increasingly became the emphasis of the Black liberation struggle. Economic self-sufficiency was defined as the sole measure of freedom. In this way, Black political leaders who were more aggressive and militant, who advocated violence, actually did not have as radical an agenda as the one King set forth in his writings. Their insistence on violent struggle was not to change the existing social order, but rather to gain power and privilege within the system. In several sermons in Strength to Love, King warned against the potential evils of capitalism, calling attention to the danger of loving money more than freedom. Unequivocally, he stated, "I still contend that the love of money is the root of much evil and may cause a man to become a gross materialist." Of course, King had no idea that Black folks would one day gain access to the material wealth by exploiting Blackness as way similar to the dominant culture. Yet, in his speeches and sermons delivered shortly before he was assassinated, many of them collected in the anthology A Testament of Hope, He vehemently opposed imperialism, materialism, and capitalism, calling for a radical transformation of society. With prophetic insight, King realized that the love ethic was central to any meaningful challenge to domination. In his last works, he was concerned less with teaching of Black people to love our enemies than with the threat of moral corruption posed by our embracing of materialistic hedonism, which he believed would create a spiritual crisis for the nation. His vision was prescient. Describing the current plight of Black people in prophetic reflections, Cornell West writes, there is an increasing class division and differentiation, creating, on the one hand, a significant Black middle class, highly anxiety ridden, insecure, willing to be co opted and incorporated into the powers that be, concerned with racism to the degree that it poses constraints on social mobility, and on the other, a vast, growing Black underclass that embodies a kind of walking nihilism of pervasive drug addiction, pervasive homicide, and an exponential rise in suicide. Now, because of deindustrialization, we also have a devastated Black industrial working class. We are talking about tremendous hopelessness. West does not even mention the growing number of Black elites, wealthy individuals who have unprecedented access to mass media, who, as producers and shapers of culture, promote values detrimental to the collective survival of Black people. To protect their class interests, these individuals also all often make it seem as though Black capitalism is the same as Black self-determination. By embracing and projecting liberal individualism as the only way to success, they undermine a vision of collective well being that necessarily requires sharing skills and resources. More than any other individuals, wealthy Black people have, by words and deeds, encouraged the Black masses to worship at the throne of money. Addiction to materialism knows no class. Yet the impact of this addiction differs depending on one's class. A rich Black entertainer in sports or the music industry buying fancy cars, designer clothes, drugs, and so on need not prey upon others. Yet poor and underclass Black folks who turn to selling drugs as a means of acquiring material luxuries prey upon the members of their communities. When a rich Black person is addicted to drugs or alcohol, he or she has easy access to a therapeutic world that can offer help and assistance. Poor and downtrodden Black folks who are substance abusers often have no recourse. Their attempts to imitate the lifestyle of the rich and famous usually have tragic consequences. No matter what our class, Black people who worship money are not interested in a love ethic. Striving for economic self sufficiency is a worthy and necessary goal for everyone. Being economically in control of one's resources is an important aspect of healthy self esteem. Valuing material goods above all else creates spiritual crisis. This crisis was vividly dramatized in Lorraine Hansberry's award winning play A Raisin in the Sun. After the death of the father, Big Walter, the younger family, must decide what to do with the insurance money they receive. The adult son, Walter Lee, wants to use the money to open a liquor store. His mother, Lena, confronts him and asks, since when did money become life? Written at the end of the 50s, this play exemplifies the transition Black people were making as we gained greater social mobility. Non-market values of communalism and sharing of resources, symbolized by the extended family household, were being replaced by liberal individualism. Walter Lee is not concerned about the good of the whole community. He wants capitalist success for himself. When Lena warns against the selling of an abusive substance, he mocks her. Prophetically, Hansberry saw the negative impact of worship of money and acceptance of addiction would have on Black life. In her play, non-market values prevail, yet they have not prevailed in the lives of many Black people. Hansberry never mentions love in A Raisin in the Sun, yet she was critical of the undue emphasis placed on attaining material success in her family and in the Black life in general, believing we neglected to focus on love to our detriment. In autobiographical work, she describes her family. Of love and my parents, there was little to be written. Their relationship to their children was utilitarian. We were fed and housed and dressed and outfitted with more cash than our associates, and that was all. We were not loving people. She recognized that the world she was raised in was one where material success was all that mattered. In Hansberry's day, there was an ongoing discussion about whether or not to dehumanize the dehumanizing impact of racism had in fact made it impossible for Black people to love. My beloved friend and comrade, James Baldwin, was often at the forefront of these debates. His quarrels with fellow novelist Richard Wright often centered on the issue of dehumanization. Wright believed wholeheartedly that Black people were incapable of loving because of the emotional scars inflicted by racist oppression. Wisely, Baldwin insisted that we are always more than our pain. Not only did he believe in our capacity to love, he felt Black people were uniquely situated to risk loving because we had suffered. In his essay, The Fire Next Time, he writes of Black people's spiritual resilience. In his essay, The Fire Next Time, he writes of Black people's spiritual resilience. I do not mean to be sentimental about suffering, but people who cannot suffer can never grow up, can never discover who they are. Baldwin would no doubt be shocked to see that many Black people today do not bear suffering in a way that makes them follow a path to love. Instead, pervasive addiction means that the desire to numb pain is greater than the force of spirit that would lead us to journey through pain and find our way to healing. In the essay, Where is the Love? June Jordan reminds us that it is always the love, whether we look to the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer or the spirit of Augustino Neto, it is always the love that will carry action into positive new places. Love remains for Black people a crucial path to healing. In retrospect, it is clear that if we do not create a foundation of love on which to build our struggles for freedom and self determination, forces of evil, of greed, and of corruption undermine and ultimately destroy all our efforts. It is not too late for Black people to return to love and ask again the metaphysical questions commonly raised by Black artists and thinkers during their heyday of freedom struggles. Questions about the relationship between dehumanization and our capacity for love. Questions about internalized racism and self hatred. Contemporary focus on material gain as the key to healing our crisis has deflected attention away from the need for emotional growth, for us to embrace more wholeheartedly the art and act of loving. Tina Turner's hit song, What's Love Got to Do with It, gave popular expression to the turning away from a love ethic. Much of hip hop culture promotes hedonistic materialism, making everything associated with gaining wealth embody the essence of cool. Like the culture as a whole, masses of Black people now look to material success as the sole measure of value and meaning in life. While we do not need to love in order to attain great riches, without a sound emotional foundation, material privilege easily corrupts. Gaining access to material privilege will never satisfy needs of the spirit. Those hungers persist and haunt us. We seek to satisfy those cravings by endless consumption, appetites that easily turn into addictions that can never be satisfied. Needs of the spirit can only be satisfied when we care for the soul. Our ancestors knew this. Only a politics of conversion where we return to love can save us. Letting all Black people and the world know we cannot live by goods alone is crucial to our collective survival and well being. We have been wounded in the place where we would know love. We know this. The lovelessness that abounds in Black life, cutting across class and circumstance, stands as a testimony. Addressing love, we proclaim our full and complex humanity. Martin Luther King urged us to remember that love transforms with redemptive power. To return to love, making a central issue in our efforts for collective recovery and healing, is not a move away from political action. Unless love is the force ungirding our efforts to transform society, we lose our way. Writing about the way militant Black power activism began to move in a direction that was anti love, Julius Lester shared this powerful insight in a column for The Guardian. Our love for Black people was overwhelmed by our inability to do everything to make that love manifest. And after a while, we could not even love each other. Lester recalls in an essay about the 60s that the movement disappointed us and we disappointed ourselves. He shares the powerful insight that had Black liberation struggle remained true to a love ethic, its positive impact would have been more profound and lasting. Recalling this period, Maya Angelou stresses that it was not a time when Black folk were turning away from domination toward love. Instead, she writes, Black men talk about change. What they really mean is exchange. They want to take over the positions of power white men have without changing structures of domination. We'll even place the culture of lovelessness. Love is profoundly political. Our deepest revolution will come when we understand this truth. Only love can give us the strength to go forward in the midst of heartbreak and misery. Only love can give us the power to reconcile, to redeem, the power to renew weary spirits and save lost souls. The transformative power of love is the foundation of all meaningful social change. Without loves, our lives are without meaning. Love is the heart of the matter, and all else has fallen. When all else has fallen away, love sustains.